Hello, and today we're going to be creating some audio effects using After Effects. And what we're trying to do is basically create some motion and visualizations of our audio. So to begin with, we've opened a new project in After Effects, and we're going to firstly, like you would with any project, start a new composition. And we're going to call this Reactive Audio, just to make our lives easier. And we're going to make sure this is on the 1080p or the HDTV 1080 setting, and doesn't matter about the background, but I'm going to try and also make sure my duration is set to around between 20 and 30 seconds for the purposes of just getting the point across. So I'll just press OK, and this will create us our composition. The next thing I'm going to need to do is import some audio. So to do this, we can either go to File, Import File, or you can simply drag your audio into your After Effects project. And it will take a moment to think, and there we go, it's imported. So it will work with either .wavs or .mp3s. So here's my audio file. So if I just simply drag this onto my timeline, like so, and if I was to press space, we can preview our audio in the scene. I can just show the waveform down here. So this is the waveform that's we're going to be working with, and this is what's going to determine how our reactive visuals play out. So the first thing we need to do is, now we've got our audio in there, we now need to start creating our visuals. So to do this, we're just going to go to Layer, New, Solid. We're going to make sure this is composition size, and I'm going to just call this Audio Visual. Doesn't matter what it's called, and you don't have to name it, but this just makes life easier if we keep in track of things. I'll press OK. I'm going to keep my background as red, but you can change this if you want to. But there we go, like so. And now we've just basically got a solid colour and our audio. At the moment, the two aren't linked. So in order to do this, we need to apply an effect to link the two together. So to do this, we can either use the Effects and Presets panel that's normally to your left, or well, basically this side, or we can go to the Effect panel, making sure we've got our layer selected, and we go to Generate. And we want to be we can either use audio spectrum or audio waveform. We're going to be using audio spectrum today, so just simply click on that, and what this does is it generates a sort of, you'll see this sort of dotted line that's generated. If I was to sort of scroll through my timeline now, you'll see nothing is happening, but that's because at the moment the two aren't actually linked. So to do that, I go to my effect control panel up here. Again, if your interface isn't laid out like this, you can always go to Window, Workspace, and reset to the default layout, which basically should look like something like this. So on my effect controls, on my audio layer, I can click on the drop down, and I want to set this to be our audio file. So in this case, it's erebus.mp3. So I'll just simply click on that. Now if I scrub through the timeline, you'll start to notice we're getting these peaks created. So if I just press play just to see. There we go, so you can see it is sort of now reacting. But it doesn't quite look visually interesting as it stands. So we now got some other options we can play with. So for example, if I sort of scrub along a bit to around here, let's say, I can adjust the height of my sort of bands. This makes it a bit more pronounced, like so. I can also adjust the frequency, so if I want them to be closer together, I can just increase the frequency like so, number of bands. So if I go really high, I get this sort of liquidy jello effect, or I can go really sparse with them. And if I hold shift whilst dragging on the values, I can change them quickly, or I can always do the drop down and use the slider if I want to. That's up to you totally and how you prefer to work. Also we've got thickness, so we can adjust how thick the kind of outlines are. I'm just going to keep it sort of default values. Again, also we can adjust the softness, so how again obviously how soft these edges appear. We can also change our colours. By default it tends to go with this kind of pinky colour, but we can always change that. So let's say I want to go with a nice kind of bright green sort of tone. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to use the inside and outside colour the same, but you could always have two different colours and you get this sort of effect. I'm just going to go with green, just to make it look a bit more uniform. Next up down here, you'll see we've got our hue interpolation. What this means, if I was to sort of scroll this through, you sort of see we can get this kind of rainbow effect being created. I'm not going to use this because I'm actually going to use another effect later to make a similar kind of look, but with a bit more control and a bit more nice variant of the gradient than the hue interpolation kind of gives. Down here we also have our display options, so by default it will show you a digital look, but if I can click on analog lines and it creates this sort of like heartbeat kind of look. Likewise I can go to the analog dots and it will create a dot to represent the peaks and troughs. I'm just going to keep it with digital for now. Below that we have our side options, so for example it'll be default to AB, so top and bottom, but if I click to side A, it sort of just gives us a flat edge with the peaks to the top. Same with side B does it, but obviously the reverse. I'm going to keep it to side A and B for now. So that's basically our general way of created. Again, doesn't look overly interesting, so what we can do is we could go and you create sort of spherical audio look to it. So to do that I just go to distort, polar coordinates, and I drag this onto my audio visual layer, and by default it'll do nothing. So if I sort of up the interpolation to let's say 100%, you now start to see it's creating this weird not desired effect. However, if I just simply change the type of conversion to rect to polar, we've now got a sort of semicircle. It's not quite a complete circle because we need to adjust our start and end points. So if I want it to be a complete circle, I can just change our start point to be 0 in the first property, and then in my endpoint property I just simply drag this until the two lines meet, like so. In fact, I'm just going to make sure they don't bleed into each other too much. There we go. So if I was to, let's say, press play now, you can sort of see how we're getting this kind of nice futuristic looking audio circle. However, it looks very loaded to one side. It's not much of action happening on here. So what I'm actually wanting to do is I'm going to in fact half this and then mirror it. I could also quarter it in the same principles and just adjust the values to be a quarter, but I'm just going to go with a half to begin with. So if I just change my endpoint to be roughly half of 1080, so around 940 mark, this gives us a kind of flat edge on the vertical axis. So this is basically one our side done. If I want to simply duplicate to the other side, I could simply use distort mirror. Again, we can use this up here if we want to, but I'm finding it quicker to type in here if I know what the effect is I'm after. I can simply drag that onto my audio visual layer, and now I can just need to adjust its reflective center. So I'm just going to pull my center until it meets the value here. So in fact the value is around 940, and I'm just going to pull it back a little bit just to sort of try and close up nicely. Now I'm noticing there's a bit of a gap down here. This is because my endpoints aren't quite right, so I can fix that by just simply pulling these first value up until they meet, and make sure that the gaps are looking correct. That'll do. So now if I sort of play it, a bit more action on both sides. Again, it's quite top heavy. To fix this, instead of mirroring it once to create a side by side, I can simply change this value to 470 like so, and now if I was to, let's say, apply a mirror on top of that, so we've got two mirror effects being applied, and again I want to change this to be 960 so it's over the top of the other one, but now I want to change my reflective angle to be 90 degrees, and I'm just going to pull this up a little bit, do the second value, and now if I was to press play again, it's now basically using our audio spectrum wave and mirroring it, so we've got 4 copies of it all within the same layer. So now our top and bottom are loaded on a more equal basis. Again, I could do this to split it into 8 to make it times by 8, 16, etc. So I can duplicate this as many times as I want, simply adjusting the start and end points and then mirroring it accordingly. But for now, this will do. This gives us something to work with. So at the moment we've got this kind of very green coloured tone. I'm just going to increase my height values a bit, and I'm also going to increase my thickness a little bit, and I'm also potentially going to increase the bands, or do I decrease them? I'm going to go with an increase just to create a bit more liquid solid fill. Let's say I want something in the middle, but I didn't want these waves to sort of intercept it. Now I could create a mask, but instead it would actually might be easier just to simply change it so the side is side B, so our waves on the outside, and we've got this clean cut circle in the middle. So for example, I could put some text in here that just says, I'm going to say, let's say logo, put that in the middle here, and I could create a nice little branded ident logo style thing. I'm not going to do that for now. So I'm going to make this a bit more visually interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to my effects options. I'm going to go to generate again, but this time I'm going to generate some 4-color gradient, and I'm going to simply again drag this onto my audio visual layer, and this gives us this nice little pastel sort of tone, which gives us 4 points of color that we can now adjust. And again, you'll notice everything within our effects has got a stopwatch next to it, which means later on when we look into the second activity, we could link these to our audio file and make it even more reactive, likewise with any effect that we could apply to this. Again, I'd encourage you to play about with some effects, see what you can create, and play about with it to get the desired results. But for now, let's just pick some tones that are kind of closely matched. I'm just going to go with some blues. I can adjust the sort of blend, how much it blends into the original colour, or how much it blends together, like so. Now if I sort of press play now, we've got a nice pastel tone where it sort of darkens to the edges and lighten at the top. Like so. So that would give us a basic nice diagram. I could, if I wanted to, let's say, duplicate this and have a layer upon layer build. So I'm just going to do that quickly. So again, I'm just going to repeat what we've done before. So layer, new solid, okay. Again, I should give it a name, but I'm not going to for now because we've understand the principle of what we're trying to achieve and we're doing this for speed. Again, I make sure my audio layer is linked to my MP3 file. I'm going to just change the look of this a bit, so I'm going to go with a bit more of a banded look. I'm going to change this to analog lines, and likewise I'm now going to make this a sphere. So again, we're using distort polar coordinates. We're dragging that onto our new layer, and we're making sure it's 100% interpolation and rectangle to polar to create a circle. It's hard to see because it's kind of overlapping our other one, and again it's not completely joined up. So again, we set the start position to 0 and the first value, and we simply drag our second value till the two meet. What I'm also going to do now is I'm actually going to have my layer selected, go to the drop down options and transform, and I'm also going to actually reduce the scale so we've got a sort of circle within a circle. And if I press play now, you can sort of see how we can start building up effects on top of each other like so. I could also, let's say, apply a glow. So in fact I'm going to apply my glow to my outer circle, so my original circle, like this, and I can increase the amount of glow that is being output into our scene and increase its intensity like so. So if I press play now, you see we've got this nice glow, so it's giving off a kind of bit of light as it gets to the edges, so you can sort of see this offset. So yeah, you can see how we can start to play with effects, build them together to generate a nice visual reactive waveform. And that will complete activity 1. We now move on to activity 2, where we're going to be converting audio into keyframes and then using those keyframes to link to other effects and control options. We're going to be able to use this to move our video piece or graphics, and this is again just going to be a very simple activity which we encourage you to experiment with and move on with. So again, I'm just going to create another composition. Again, the same settings as we had before, 1080p, 1920 by 1080, and again we're going to make sure that we import our audio. So again, you can go to File, Import, and import the audio file of your choice. We drag that to our timeline, and that's basically where we're at now. This time, however, we're going to go slightly different to what we did before. So instead of generating a new layer and then using an effect, using the audio spectrum effect, we're actually going to use the audio itself to create keyframes, which is what we will be then linking to our other properties. So if I simply right click on my audio layer and I go to the keyframe assistant, you'll notice that we have an option called Convert Audio to Keyframes. If I simply click on that, like so, this will create a new layer which will be called Audio Amplitude. So if we just have a quick look at that on the drop down, and we drop down the effects, it gives us 3 channels, well rather 2 channels and 1 with both. So if I click on the drop down for both of these like so, each of these channels have a slider, and it'll be this slider that we'll be using to link to our desired actions. So if I just zoom right in here, you'll notice that we've got these variety of keyframes. Each of these keyframes represents a peak and trough in our audio. and it's which is what our desired animation or piece will be looking for. So what I can do now is I'm just going to create an asset within our scene. Again, I could import an image piece, which we will do afterwards, but for now I'm just going to create a basic shape. I'm going to use I'm just going to create a square and a new shape layer like so, and as you'll notice, again, nothing's going to happen to begin with. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually make this scale in accordance to our audio. So if I click on the drop down for transform, and you should be familiar from this from year one, we have the little stopwatches next to each of our properties. We could theoretically copy our keyframes from here and paste them into the properties here. However, that's not the dynamic way of doing it, and it's also prone to errors. So instead, what we're actually going to do is we're going to use some expressions, but we're actually going to get After Effects to create the expressions for us where possible. So to create or open an expression panel, we simply hold the Alt button and click on the stopwatch of the property we want to link up, like so. What this will do is open up an expression panel like so. We could, if we knew the actual expression, type it in here, but what we're going to do is we're actually just going to use the Pickwick and link it to our property within another layer. Again, we can use this method to link between compositions and between properties, but for now we're looking and concerning ourselves with the audio. So I'm just going to drop down my audio amplitude, and I'm going to make sure I've dropped down my layers, and I'm going to use just both channels for this activity. So with my scale, I'm going to click on the expression pick whip and click and drag that over to the slider until I've got this box around it like so, and then let go. What this is doing is, if I just sort of look here, it's created this expression for us, which is basically looking at this composition at this layer and then linking to a layer called audio amplitude, and then applying an effect of both channels and linking to the slider. So the scale will now adjust depending on our peaks and troughs. So if I press play just to show that in action. So you can see now our shape is scaling up and down to the peaks and troughs. If you find, for example, like here, it's a little bit on the small side, we can simply go into our expression panel here, because we won't be able to adjust these values manually, because it will just default back to our link. If I go into our expression here and I simply type plus, open square bracket, and this first value will be our X value, so 70, comma, and our second value will be our Y value, so 70 again, and then square bracket, and I just click back in our scene. What this does is it uses the value that's within our audio amplitude and then adding a 70 on top of that. Likewise, if we actually wanted to reduce the scale, we can type in -70, -70, or -10, -10, etc, etc. So if I just quickly show that in action and press play, you'll notice it's now still doing the scaling to our audio, but it's now a bit more on the reasonably viewable side. If I wanted this to deform and actually just change our shape, I can actually change one of these values. So let's say 1070. You'll notice now we've got this kind of thin rectangle. So I'll press play again. It's now scaling and creating this sort of semi-bulging bouncing effect kind of thing. If I at any point wanted my expression to do the reverse of what it's doing, i.e. at the moment it's scaling up and scaling down, I can always type negative at the beginning of the expression, and it would actually do the opposite. It won't work with scale, hence why we're getting this error. But I will show you an example of where you can use it, so we could reverse the activity and the action as it were. So as you see, we can use that scale. We could also apply that similar principle to any effect. That's got a stopwatch value next to it. So let's try doing this with a sort of distortion effect. So if I go to distort, and I'm going to link this to ripple, and then I'm going to drag my ripple onto my shape layer. I'm going to give it some radius like so, and adjust its sort of width and height. Again, any of these values could be linked to audio, but all I'm going to concern myself with now, for now, is the radius. So if I go to my effect drop down, I again Alt click on radius, I click the pick whip and drag that to our audio amplitude layer, and I link this to the slider, and then I sort of click off and press play. The actual ripple will change depending on the sort of audio peak. I'm just going to turn the scale off for a second so we can sort of see that in action. So to turn the scale off, I can just simply remove the expression, click off, and it will default back. So if I just want to show that in action now, you sort of see how this is rippling to the tune. Again, this will be more obvious on certain backgrounds and images than others. But just to show that we can actually apply and generate and change any effect with a stopwatch with audio. But yeah, basically, if you just want to play about with that and see what you can create, I'll just quickly show you an example of what I've produced using the same principles of audio amplitude. So converting our audio file into keyframes and then linking it to various properties on different layers. So I'm just going to quickly open up a project that I've worked on recently, so I don't want to save the changes to that project. So if I just simply, I'm just going to quickly put this on half because it's going to take a while to process. So what you see here is a robot that's split up into multiple layers. So I created this robot in Illustrator, and I've tried to separate its layers out as much as possible. And let's just take one of his arms, for example. So one of his arms would be layer 10. So this arm would be, this is this arm here. I simply adjusted my anchor point. So again, I used the pan behind tool, drag my anchor point to where the rotation point I want to be. I then Alt clicked on the rotation value for that layer. So I simply went to the transform options and Alt clicked, or clicking on the layer and pressing R brings up the rotation options like so. And then I pick whipped that value to my audio channel in my audio amplitude. Now I tried out right channel and left channel to see if that made any difference. Again, this audio piece isn't dual channelly created, so it didn't really make any difference. But I noticed that if I sort of just simply did it with both arms by default, it sort of did this, which is not what I wanted. I didn't want both arms going in the same direction. So to combat that, I wanted this arm to go this way and this arm to go this way based on the audio peaks and troughs. So I simply went to my expression, and before the expression I put a negative sign in, and now this reversed it, so instead of going in the same direction, one went one way, one went the other. So you can sort of see how we can build up effects using simply audio, whether that is using audio amplitude, or we can generate kind of visuals of the audio within the audio spectrum effects. So feel free to play about.